Picture the scene. An elegant dining room, tables lined with crystal glasses reflecting the soft light of the chandeliers, bottles of rare wine displayed like precious jewels, and a discerning audience accustomed to tasting only the best. The air is one of sophistication, but also judgment. In a corner, almost unnoticed, a simple woman adjusts her worn apron. She's not wearing a long dress, her makeup is elaborate, her posture is rehearsed. She's just a cook, one among many, invisible to eyes that only know how to value diplomas and famous surnames. And this is precisely where the great contradiction of this story begins. The contrast between worlds that rarely intersect. On one side, renowned critics, business people who collect wines as if they were works of art, sommeliers trained for years in expensive courses capable of recognizing a vintage by aroma alone. On the other, a woman who never attended wine school, who spent her life in cramped kitchens, stirring pots, chopping vegetables, and serving meals to people who may never have looked her directly in the eye. Who, in their right mind, would have imagined she'd be capable of challenging that universe? In fact, the most intriguing question is, how could someone who never had a formal opportunity to learn match, or even surpass, those who consider themselves absolute masters of wine? This is the spark that ignites the flame of curiosity, because when the roles are reversed, when the improbable happens, that's when the stories become unforgettable. But don't think this narrative is just about wine. No, it's about prejudice, about the rush to judgment, about how society loves to label those who don't fit the mold. After all, how many times have you been underestimated? How many times has someone looked at you and decided, without knowing anything about your life, that you weren't worthy enough to be there? Well, that's exactly what she faced. In that room, when she was invited to hold the first glass, there was no respectful silence. There were muffled laughs, snide comments, looks that said, "She's going to mess up, she doesn't understand any of this." It was as if everyone had already written the ending of the story before she even began speaking. And isn't it curious how human beings love to predict others' failures, but rarely bet on unexpected success? The irony is that the same audience that despised her was about to experience one of the greatest setbacks imaginable. Only until that moment, no one knew. Not even she fully grasped the magnitude of what was about to happen. And before I continue, let me ask you one thing. If you enjoy true stories that prove how appearances can be deceiving, please leave a like now. This will help more people learn about these surprising narratives. And of course, subscribe to the channel because this story is just beginning. And what follows will leave you speechless. Because believe me, from here on, every detail will show that the improbable can be much more powerful than the arrogance of those who think they are untouchable. And this is where we enter this woman's life. Who was she really, beyond her simple apron and the common cook label? What was in her story that could explain such sensitivity to the world of wine? That's what you're going to find out now. Before winning surprised glances in a luxurious dining room, this woman had already won silent battles in the narrow corridors of stuffy kitchens. Her life began not surrounded by crystal glasses, but by dented pots, ancient stoves, and long work days that began before sunrise and ended when the city was asleep. It was during these hours that she learned firsthand that food is not just a mixture of ingredients, but also stories, memories, and feelings. While many boasted of studying at renowned gastronomy and oenology universities, she studied by observation. She observed the smell of frying onions, the doneness of the meat, a customer's reaction to a simple dish, but one made with soul. Perhaps that was her secret, learning not from expensive books, but through direct contact, through the daily practice of sensitivity. And here's an uncomfortable comparison. How many times have you seen someone with an extensive resume, full of certifications, but who in practice didn't deliver half of what they promised? And conversely, how many ordinary people without degrees have proven themselves to be more competent than many considered experts? This is the reflection his story provokes from the beginning. Can technical knowledge without sensitivity truly touch people? She didn't understand the sophisticated language of wine critics. She didn't speak of an aromatic bouquet or well-structured tannins. Her language was different. When she tasted something, she remembered a field she had visited as a child, the smell of firewood that permeated her clothes when she returned home, the taste of a ripe fruit she had picked hidden in her neighbor's yard. The world of wine for her wasn't a matter of technical jargon, but of affective memory, and that's precisely where the great disruption of expectations lies. While everyone was concerned with demonstrating erudition and impressing with difficult terms, she simply connected aromas and flavors to real experiences. A technique no manual teaches, because it comes from life, not the classroom, yet the world rarely values this kind of wisdom. For years, she was simply the cook who knew how to season well. She never received applause, never was mentioned in newspapers, never received the recognition often given to people with far less dedication and talent. And it is precisely this invisibility that makes what is about to happen even more powerful. Now think about it. How many people do you know who could be geniuses in some field, but never had the chance to show it? People who were limited by prejudice, lack of opportunities, or simply the arrogance of those who never gave them a chance. This story is about them too, and it's at this very point that an unexpected invitation changes everything. An invitation that seemed small, almost insignificant, but that would open the door to a clash of completely different worlds. Her life seemed to follow a predictable course: cooking every day, serving meals, hearing quick compliments, and then returning to anonymity. But it's curious how sometimes destiny presents itself in almost invisible details. And in this case, it all began with an invitation that, at first glance, didn't seem grand. A fine dining restaurant in the United States was hosting a special tasting evening. It would bring together respected critics, industry insiders, and sommeliers with years of training and international travel behind them. It was an event for the select few, where every word spoken over a glass could mean prestige or discredit. She, of course, wasn't on the guest list, at least not officially. Her role would have been different, helping in the kitchen, ensuring the dishes were served perfectly, and perhaps discreetly collecting a few glasses at the end of the night. Nothing that would have put her in the spotlight. But life loves to test logic, and by one of those unlikely twists of chance, the opportunity arose for her to occupy a position no one would have imagined for a simple cook. Someone from the organization, impressed by comments about her sensitivity to flavors, made the bold suggestion, why not let her try it too? It would be interesting. To some, it seemed like a joke, almost a moment of entertainment amid the seriousness of the tasters. After all, what harm would there be in putting an employee in front of experts? It would be fun to see the contrast, wouldn't it? Little did they know that they were opening the door to a show that would completely change the course of that night. The invitation was accepted unexpectedly. She hesitated. She felt the weight of responsibility, butterflies in her stomach, the fear of being ridiculed. But there was also an inner strength that said, "You've been through much worse. A glass of wine won't knock you down." And so it was. In that amidst suppressed laughter and ironic glances, she was led into the main hall. It wasn't just a change of physical space. It was like crossing an invisible border, a wall erected by prejudice. On one side, the experts in ties. On the other, a woman with the simplicity of real life in her eyes. What no one imagined was that that timid step would represent a game changer. That invitation, seen by many as a joke, would later be remembered as the moment when an ordinary cook silenced the arrogance of an entire dining room. And now that she was there, in front of the glasses, the inevitable question remained. How would the audience react to seeing someone outside the norm, trying to venture into such exclusive territory? As soon as she walked through the door and into the salon, the atmosphere changed. Not because someone had officially announced her presence, but because the contrast was impossible to ignore. Amidst the well-cut suits, designer dresses, and confident looks, a woman appeared in a simple apron with work-marked hands and a shy posture. It was as if a strange piece had been placed in a luxurious puzzle. The first whispers began quietly, but soon spread like wildfire. "What's she doing here?" muttered a businessman, glass in hand. Another, more mocking, ventured, "Maybe she wants to season the wine with salt." Muffled laughter echoed among some. Groups. It was the perfect example of prejudice manifesting itself in its rawest form, laughing at those who don't fit in before even giving them a chance to prove anything, and this is a point worth reflecting on. Why is society so quick to mock those who come from below? Perhaps because it's easier to laugh than to admit that talent can emerge from anywhere. Perhaps because many feel threatened by the possibility of being surpassed by someone who hasn't traveled the same expensive and elitist paths. She felt those gazes piercing her skin like blades. She could hear the whispered jokes, sense the smiles at the corners of their mouths. And for a moment, she considered retreating. Who in her place wouldn't? But something inside her told her to stay. It was as if her whole life had been training for this moment. After all, those who have survived daily contempt aren't so easily knocked down by a few laughs. Meanwhile, the master of ceremonies, trying to keep the mood light, made a point of announcing with a certain ironic tone, "And now we will have a special appearance by our cook, who has kindly agreed to try some of tonight's wines." The word cook sounded almost like a joke, a reminder that she was not part of that elite. But little did they know that that simple title would be the same one that would become a symbol of victory a few minutes later. And here's an invitation for you. If this kind of situation also bothers you, if you also can't stand seeing someone belittled just because of their appearance or status, leave a like right now. This helps spread stories that prove that no one should be judged by their cover, but by their content. The mood was set. The laughter still echoed, but it would soon give way to an awkward silence. Because next would come the moment no one expected. The first glass would be placed in their hands. The room fell silent as the first glass was handed to her. It was like watching a play where everyone already knew the ending. For them, the scene would end in embarrassment. She, with her hands scarred from kitchen work, held the crystal carefully, as if it were something too fragile to be held in her hands. Eyes met, some with malicious anticipation, others with pure disbelief. She brought the glass to her face, closed her eyes for a few seconds, and took a deep breath. While many expected just a quick sip, followed by a banal comment, she did something no one expected. She swirled the glass delicately, let the wine breathe, and slowly inhaled the aroma that rose in almost invisible waves. The room held its breath. It was then that instead of fumbling, she began to speak. Her voice was calm, steady, almost poetic. She described the first aroma as reminiscent of ripe red fruits, cited subtle wood notes reminiscent of an old bookshelf, spoke of a vibrant acidity that brought freshness, and a lingering finish that lingered like a gentle melody on the palate. She didn't use fancy words, but each description sounded precise, almost impossible for someone who supposedly knew nothing about wine. The effect was immediate. The giggles stopped. Some critics frowned, others began exchanging suspicious glances. Had she simply repeated something she'd heard before? But no, there was too much naturalness in the way she spoke, as if she were truly translating feelings into words. And here's a thought. How often do we judge someone because we believe appearances reveal the whole truth? It's like looking at a book with a plain cover and imagining there's nothing valuable inside. But when we open it, we discover pages capable of changing the way we see the world. That's exactly what happened here. An understated cover revealed surprising content. With each sentence she spoke, the silence grew, and the more the silence grew, the stronger her voice became. The room, which had previously seemed like a courtroom, began to transform into an audience. The master of ceremonies, who had initially jokingly called it a cameo, was no longer smiling. He was as surprised as the others. It was impossible to deny this woman had a rare sensitivity, something not learned from manuals or diplomas, but born from the deep connection between memory, experience, and taste. And even after finishing her analysis, she didn't seek approval. She didn't wait for applause. She didn't try to impress. She simply placed the glass on the table and remained silent. Simplicity once again spoke louder than any ostentation, but the audience still wasn't convinced. Some believed it had been mere luck, a lucky guess, a stroke of coincidence, and to prove otherwise, even more complex wines would be placed before them. The real challenge was just beginning. If the first glass had already provoked surprise, what followed was almost a silent duel. The most renowned sommeliers, uncomfortable with the scene, decided they needed to test this woman. It was as if they wanted to prove that their initial success had been mere luck, a flash of wisdom that would never be repeated. They then brought a much more complex wine, a drink that even seasoned professionals had difficulty describing. The atmosphere was once again charged with anticipation. The looks returned to disdain, but now tinged with a touch of trepidation. After all, what if she got it right again? She held the glass as if holding a memory. She swirled the liquid slowly, watched the tears running down the crystal, and calmly brought her nose closer. The silence was almost absolute. And then she began to speak. She described notes of spices, mentioned a touch of damp earth that reminded her of her childhood in the countryside, and even mentioned the sensation of smoke that evoked cold nights by the wood stove. Her explanation wasn't just technical, it was narrative. She transformed each sip into a story. The audience was divided. Some crossed their arms in disbelief, trying to find fault. Others could no longer hide their astonishment. With each accurate description, she dismantled brick by brick the wall of prejudice that separated her from that world. And it's curious to observe how arrogance reacts when confronted. Instead of immediately acknowledging it, many insisted on testing further. They added another bottle, then another, increasing the level of difficulty as if they were in a sports competition. But in each round, the cook responded with precision and naturalness. She wasn't trying to impress. She simply expressed her feelings, with the sincerity of someone who never had to pretend. The tension grew to the point where it transformed the room into an invisible ring. There were no punches or shouts, but each of her analyses was a direct blow to years of elitism. She wasn't just tasting wine. She was proving that talent recognizes no social boundaries, that true knowledge doesn't need a badge to be validated. And then comes the big question. How many times has the world lost incredible talent simply because it didn't give them space? How many cooks, bricklayers, farmers, or drivers could have mastered fields they never had the chance to explore? This thought made those present even more uncomfortable, because with each success, it became clear that the logic of only those with a diploma are good was crumbling. When another perfect round ended, the room was in shock. No one could laugh. No one dared mock. All that was left was to wait for the next move, the next glass that might finally put an end to the doubt that hung in the air. But destiny had something even greater in store. One last taste, a wine so rare that many had never even had the chance to taste it in their lifetime. Would this be the opportunity to consecrate her or to unmask her? The room, already utterly silent, seemed to breathe with her. After several rounds in which the chef disarmed one by one the expert's traps, the final test came. A bottle was brought out, kept under lock and key, shrouded in near mystery. An extremely rare wine, produced in limited quantities, known for its complexity and, for many, impossible to identify without years of training and privileged access. It was the final test. The organizers seemed certain that this time she would stumble, and deep down, the audience was waiting for that slip-up. After all, how could a woman with no title decipher a wine that even veteran critics hesitated to analyze? It was the perfect opportunity to put an end to that unbelievable streak of successes. The bottle was solemnly opened, and the glass rested in her hands. She didn't rush the gesture. She observed the color in the light of the room, slowly swirled the crystal, and let the aroma rise. She closed her eyes as if drifting off into memories, and it was in that instant that everything changed. While everyone waited hesitantly, she began speaking with the confidence of someone who recognizes an old song. She described the wine in layers. First, the ripe, dark fruits, then the hint of spice, the subtle leather note, the balance between acidity and body. But she didn't stop there. She explained that the wine could only come from a specific region, mentioned the soil type, the climatic conditions, and, to everyone's astonishment, even ventured the vintage year. A heavy silence fell over the room. It was as if no one dared breathe. Some of the top sommeliers present discreetly raised their glasses to their noses, trying to confirm what she was saying. And one by one, they realized she was absolutely right. She hadn't just gotten the wine right. She had told its story, as if she had been in the vineyard itself during the harvest. It was at that moment that the masks fell. The mocking laughter turned to looks of disbelief. The air of superiority gave way to a mixture of respect and discomfort. And suddenly, the cook, who just minutes before had been the butt of jokes, had become the absolute star of the evening. It's at this point that we understand the true value of sensitivity, because in the end, it wasn't about memorizing regional names or repeating technical jargon. It was about feeling, about translating memories into words, about giving meaning to every detail that went unnoticed by the arrogant. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson. While many use knowledge to show off, she used her gift to connect. It wasn't about impressing, but about revealing the soul hidden inside a bottle. If that part already gave you goosebumps, just imagine what's yet to come. So take this opportunity to subscribe to the channel and ensure you don't miss stories like this, which show how the improbable can be stronger than any title. And of course, leave your like right now so more people discover that talent has no label. The room was in shock, but the story didn't end there. Because what follows such a shocking revelation isn't just surprise, but also reaction. And the reactions, as you'll see below, were as revealing as the tasting itself. When she finished speaking, the room was suspended in an almost sacred silence. There was no more laughter, no more cross comments. All that could be heard was the sound of the racing hearts of those who, minutes before, had felt like absolute masters of knowledge. Some critics, visibly uncomfortable, tried to hide their astonishment by fiddling with their glasses or staring at the floor. Others, unable to contain their admiration, clapped timidly, as if still unsure whether to applaud or remain in shock. Gradually, the applause spread throughout the room, growing in intensity, until the entire room seemed surrendered to the greatness of this woman who, until recently, was considered just a simple cook. But, as always happens when the improbable overturns certainties, not everyone accepted it easily. Some tried to justify it. They said she'd probably heard of that wine before, that she'd gotten lucky, or that it was just a coincidence. It was the resistance of arrogance trying to hold on, even in the face of undeniable evidence. And here's a thought. How many times have we seen this in real life? When someone humble proves their worth, there are always those who would rather make excuses than admit their own prejudice. It's easier to deny the talent of others than to admit we were wrong. Meanwhile, she remained serene. She didn't celebrate, didn't raise her voice, didn't rub her victory in anyone's face. She simply smiled discreetly, as if she knew she needed nothing more than the truth itself. This posture, paradoxically, further heightened the impact of what had happened. The room, which began the evening as a stage for vanity, transformed into a space for reflection. Many there, silently, may have asked themselves, "What if I too had once looked down on someone who could have taught me so much?" This is the wound that remains when arrogance is dismantled. And I'd like to take this opportunity to ask you, has this ever happened to you? Have you ever been doubted about your abilities simply because of your appearance or where you're from? If so, share in the comments. Your experience can inspire and strengthen others going through the same struggle. Because in that moment, it wasn't just her victory. It was a victory for everyone who's ever been underestimated, for everyone who's ever been told you can't do it, and yet proven otherwise. And yet, the night held another twist. Because if the initial reaction was shock, what came next was definitive. Recognition, something not even she expected. After minutes that felt like hours, disbelief gave way to something greater. Recognition. Those who had laughed at her earlier in the evening now approached with restrained respect. Critics, business owners and sommeliers came to shake hands, praise her precision, and most importantly, admit that they had underestimated someone they, until recently, had considered invisible. There was no formal ceremony, no red carpet, but the effect was powerful. Within minutes, the woman who entered discreetly in a simple apron became the center of attention, not for ostentation, but for her authenticity and skill that no one could deny. The distinction between title and talent became crystal clear in that room. While diplomas impress, experience, sensitivity, and dedication transform. And that's precisely where the lesson lies. True recognition isn't given by appearances or status, but by genuine competence and the courage to face seemingly impossible challenges. She proved that even someone invisible who has never received public applause can, when necessary, surpass any expectation. Comparing this to life outside that salon, we realized something curious. How often do we ignore people simply because we judge them as ordinary? How many opportunities do we miss by failing to see the real potential that lies beyond what appears on the surface? She was living proof that talent and sensitivity don't ask for permission to be seen. As the evening drew to a close, an air of reverence settled in. People who had looked at her with disdain minutes before now leaned in to hear her opinions, learn from her insights, and reflect on their own prejudices. It wasn't just about the wine. It was about humanity, humility, and the power to surprise when least expected. And this is where I reiterate my invitation. If you've ever felt underestimated or think you know someone with hidden potential, leave a like. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss inspiring stories that break expectations, and share in the comments any instances where you or someone you know was unfairly underestimated. Because, in the end, her story isn't just about a tasting. It's about how the courage to put yourself in the right place at the right time can transform the perception of everyone around you. At the end of that unforgettable evening, the image that remained in the room wasn't just of a chef surprising experts. It was living proof that talent, courage, and dedication can manifest where least expected. That simple woman, whose hands and apron bore the marks of years of silent labor, had achieved the impossible, transforming prejudice into admiration, disdain into respect, laughter into applause, and more than that, her story forces us to reflect on our own lives. How many times have you stopped believing in someone or yourself because of superficial judgments? How many opportunities for learning and growth have been missed because we didn't look beyond appearances? This narrative shows that true value doesn't depend on titles, wealth, or status, but on dedication,